The gates of the Karen pit opened like a mouth giving up a secret. Fog spilled from the tunnels and slid across the sand. Floodlights burned through falling snow, turning every flake into a bright pin. Drones hovered above the ring, feeding the spectacle to a billion screens beyond the rim. A handler shoved Elias Vaughn forward. He stumbled once, just enough to earn laughter. "Is that the fighter?" A mercenary jeered from the holding rail. "Looks like someone's grandfather." Elias didn't lift his eyes. A faded patch covered his left eye, stitched so many times it had lost its shape. His hair was iron grey, his face lined, his mouth set in a neutral line that didn't ask for mercy or offer it. A dark cloak hung from his shoulders, heavy fabric cut short for movement, and beneath it sat mismatched plates strapped close to ribs and collarbones, old armor, worn honest. The announcer's voice rolled across the pit. "Opener, citizens of the Spiral." A human entrant provided by the Vulture Company, an apology in the shape of meat. Above the mercenary box, the Vulture banner unfurled, a black bird clutching a coin. Their captain lounged behind smoked glass with officers at his back. Beside him stood Krashul the Unbroken, champion of the pit, a towering Dravathai with scarred scales and a crest braided in gold wire. His attention stayed on Elias the way a knife stays on a throat. "He won't last," the Vulture captain said, amused. Krashul's slit pupils narrowed. "Humans last longer than they should." Behind Elias, a young human handler hissed, "Do yourself a favor. Go down fast. They'll keep it clean." Elias paused at the edge where stone met sand. He listened to the crowd as if it were weather. "I'm not here for clean," he said. Then he stepped out. The pit smelled of metal and old blood baked into grit. Frost rimmed every footprint. Elias rolled his shoulders once, as if settling a pack. No weapon. No shield. Only his gloves, the cloak, and his breathing, slow, regulated. Across the arena, a second gate clanged open. A brackaxe lumbered out, all plates and muscle, cleaver in hand, serrated, stained, absurdly large. A shock chain still dragged from his waist ring, sparking now and then where it scraped rock. The creature bellowed, and the sound hit the stands like a drum. The announcer sang, delighted. "Goran of the Bone Spires. 200 kilos of consequence." Goran lifted the cleaver one-handed, pointing it at Elias. "Kneel, human." Elias kept his gaze on Goran's shoulders, not the blade. "No." A horn sounded. Goran charged. The first chop came down to split a man into parts. Elias didn't retreat. He stepped in, shifted his hips, and slid sideways. The cleaver bit sand and threw up a spray of ice grit. The crowd howled, half thrilled, half irritated at the delay. Goran ripped the blade free and swung again, wider, faster, angry. Elias hopped over a low sweep, landed close, touched Goran's forearm with 2 fingers, and drifted away. Not a strike. A measurement. In the box, the Vulture captain laughed. "He's trying to tire him out." Krashul's claws tightened on the railing. "He's mapping him." On the sand, Elias kept circling. He forced Goran to pivot, to reset, to swing at emptiness. Each miss drove shock up Goran's wrists and shoulders. Each overcommitted step made him heavier. Elias's cloak fluttered, but his feet stayed quiet, saving motion the way some men saved bullets. Goran roared and lifted the cleaver overhead with both hands. Veins stood out on his neck. He slammed down with everything he had. Elias let the edge pass close enough to shave the air, then stepped aside and reached for the chain dragging behind Goran. He hooked it with 2 fingers and yanked, not to pull the brackaxe down, but to twist his center of gravity. Momentum did the rest. Goran's boots slid on the frozen sand. The cleaver buried itself deep and stuck. Elias moved in, pressed his shoulder into Goran's back, and drove a knee into the hamstring. Precise. Ugly. The tendon snapped like a cable. Goran crashed to one knee, howling. The crowd erupted again, this time with surprise threaded through the joy. Elias leaned toward Goran's ear. "If you want to live, stop performing." Goran tried to rise anyway, rage overriding sense. He lunged for Elias, dragging his own trapped cleaver. Elias stepped back and let Goran's weight take him forward. The brackaxe toppled face first, still gripping the haft. His skull struck metal with a dull, final sound. For a heartbeat, the pit went strangely quiet. Even the drones seemed to hang still. Then the announcer found his voice. The human remained standing. Elias stood over the fallen giant, chest rising evenly. A thin line of blood marked his sleeve where serrations had kissed him, but he didn't look at it. He looked up at the glass boxes, the captain, the officers, the champion, and at the galaxy's hunger behind them. He raised his hands slightly, palms open, as if to show he carried nothing at all. Somewhere high in the stands, a betting board flickered as odds collapsed, numbers chasing each other into nonsense. A Dravathai veteran in the front row stopped shouting and sat down slowly, as if remembering a corridor filled with smoke and human silhouettes that never stayed where you aimed. Elias felt the familiar ache in his knee, the old injury that made him limp on cold days. He welcomed it. Pain was a metronome. It kept time when adrenaline lied. He breathed in, tasted iron, and waited. No cheers, no glare, only that calm emptiness in him. In the vulture box, the captain's smile slipped. "Who is he?" Krashul didn't answer. His tongue flicked across his teeth, tasting something old and unwanted. Elias turned toward the tunnel he'd come from, ready for the next gate, the next laugh, the next mistake. Snow settled on his shoulders like ash. The gates did not close behind Elias Vaughn. They slammed. That was new. The sound rolled across the pit like a verdict, heavy and deliberate. The handlers didn't rush in to drag away the corpse. Med drones stayed back. The arena masters wanted the moment to breathe. They wanted the audience to feel it. Elias stayed where he was, one boot resting near the Bracax's fallen cleaver. He could feel the tremor in his leg now, a reminder written into bone. He adjusted his stance without looking down, shifting weight until the ache dulled into something manageable. The announcer cleared his throat. "Unexpected survival," he said carefully. "The arena, in its generosity, authorizes a continuation bout." A low murmur swept the stands, confusion giving way to appetite. From the opposite tunnel, the second gate began to rise. This one moved slowly. A ripple of recognition passed through the mercenary boxes as the figure stepped into view. Sleek armor, jointed and black as oil, plates overlapping with predatory elegance. 4 arms, each ending in taloned hands fitted with compact shock blades. The helm was narrow, insectile, with a faint violet glow behind the visor. "Vila Kith," someone whispered. Silent tear. Elias felt it then, the subtle change in pressure, the way the air itself seemed to lean away. Vila moved without sound, claws barely marking the sand. An executioner, not a brute. Trained for speed, for disassembly, for finishing fights before the crowd understood what it was watching. Vila stopped 10 meters away and tilted his head. "Human," he said. His voice carried the faint modulation of a throat not built for trade languages. "You are damaged." "Yes," Elias replied. "You should not have survived Goran." "Correct." A pause. Vila's helm angled slightly. "State your designation." Elias said nothing. The horn sounded again. Vila vanished. Not literally, just faster than most eyes could track. The crowd roared as he appeared to Elias's left, blades flashing for the neck and thigh in a crossing pattern designed to cripple and finish. Elias turned into it, not away, raising his forearm to catch the upper strike on hardened plating while stepping inside the lower arc. The blade kissed fabric and burned a shallow line across his calf. Pain flared. Elias welcomed it. He drove his elbow forward, not to strike, but to jam Vila's shoulder joint mid-motion. The alien twisted, flexible where Goran had been rigid, and flowed past, claws scraping sparks from Elias's armor as they disengaged. They separated. Vila circled, faster now, movements tightening. "You predict," he said. "That is rare." "You telegraph," Elias replied. The crowd leaned in. This wasn't flailing violence. This was something else, something colder. Vila attacked again, a storm of precise angles. Elias retreated 3 steps, then planted his foot and stopped. He let one blade bite his shoulder plate, absorbed the shock, and used the contact to pull Vila forward half a step off balance. His knee came up, sharp and economical, catching Vila under the rib plating. The alien hissed and disengaged hard, skidding back. In the vulture box, the captain stood. Why isn't he bleeding? Krashul didn't look at him. His gaze was fixed on Elias's face, on the way his jaw stayed loose, eyes steady, breath controlled. Because he knows where not to be cut. Vila straightened slowly. The violet glow behind his visor pulsed once. You are old, he said. But you are not slow. No, Elias said. I'm finished. Vila's head snapped up. Finished fighters die. So do unfinished ones. They closed again. This time, Elias changed the rhythm. He shortened his steps, forced Vila to overextend, then dropped suddenly, sliding under a sweeping blade. His hand came up and slapped the inside of Vila's knee, hard enough to trigger a neural reflex. The joint locked for a fraction of a second. It was enough. Elias rose into the opening and drove his shoulder into Vila's chest, carrying him backward into the embedded cleaver. Metal met composite with a sound like tearing cloth. Vila spasmed, shock blades flickering out as the crowd screamed. Elias stepped away as Vila collapsed, smoke curling from the wound. He didn't watch the body fall. He watched the stance. The silence this time was different. It wasn't confusion. It was calculation. A Dravathai veteran in the lower tier slowly raised a clawed hand and made a warding sign used only by those who had survived human boarding actions. 2 seats over, a manted noble leaned back, antennae flattening, eyes unfocusing as if old memories had surfaced without invitation. In the control tower, alarms chimed, soft, bureaucratic sounds. Data packets raced across sealed networks. Old archives stirred. Elias felt the weight of it settle. The moment where the lie began to crack. He reached up and touched the edge of his eye patch. The announcer's voice faltered. Contestant, what are you? Elias pulled the patch free. The scar beneath was clean and unmistakable. Not a wound from the pit, not a ritual mark. A precise, surgical line running through the eye socket and into the temple. Military. Human. Classified. For a heartbeat. Nothing happened. Then a name rippled through the arena, not shouted, not announced, but passed from mouth to mouth with the urgency of a warning. Reaper. Krashul inhaled sharply. His claws dug grooves into the railing. No, the vulture captain whispered. He's dead. Elias looked up at the champion at last. Their eyes met across the sand. You should have let me walk out, Elias said quietly. Krashul said nothing. He couldn't. Above them, the broadcast stuttered. Symbols replaced faces as automated systems tried, and failed, to bury what the galaxy was remembering. Elias lowered his hand, the patch hanging loose between his fingers. Snow settled into his hair, melted on his skin, traced the scar as if outlining it for those who had forgotten. The gates began to rise again. This time, the crowd did not cheer. The arena masters did not announce the next bout. They didn't need to. The moment Elias Vaughn's scar had been exposed, the pit changed character. The lights dimmed by a fraction, shifting from spectacle to sanction. Drones reconfigured their flight patterns, forming a higher ring, containment instead of coverage. The audience felt it before they understood it. This was no longer entertainment. This was an incident. Across the sand, the central gate split apart. Krashul the Unbroken stepped into the arena. He filled the space the way mountains filled horizons. Scales layered like forged shields, each marked by scars that told stories of opponents crushed, burned, dismembered. His war harness hummed with contained energy, servos flexing as he moved. In his hands, he carried no blade. He did not need one. The crowd erupted, reflexively loud, as if volume alone could restore balance. Krashul stopped 10 meters from Elias. Snow settled on his crest and melted instantly. So, Krashul said, voice amplified without tech, the ghost breathes. Elias adjusted his cloak, slow and deliberate. His eye burned faintly where the scar met cold air. You shouldn't have put me in the pit. Krashul laughed once, harsh. You should have stayed buried. Humans lost their wars. We didn't lose, Elias said. We withdrew. The words cut deeper than any blade. A murmur spread through the stands, disbelieving and afraid. Krashul's tail lashed, cracking the frozen sand. You ran. Elias shook his head. We learned. The horn sounded, not ceremonial this time, but sharp, urgent. Krashul moved first. He crossed the distance in a single surge, far faster than his size suggested, fist swinging with enough force to pulp steel. Elias dove forward, not back, rolling beneath the arc as the blow detonated the ground behind him. Stone fragments tore into the air like shrapnel. Elias came up inside Krashul's reach and struck, not with power, but placement. 2 fingers jammed into a seam beneath the chest plating. Krashul snarled as a nerve cluster misfired, his arm spasming wide. He adapted instantly, grabbing Elias mid-turn and hurling him across the pit. Elias hit the ground hard, breath driven from his lungs. He slid, rolled, and came up on one knee, blood wetting his mouth. Pain flared along his ribs, fractured, not broken. Acceptable. The crowd roared approval now. Strength reassured them. Krashul advanced, measured, predatory. You're slower than I remember. You're heavier, Elias replied. Krashul lunged again, tail sweeping low while his other arm hammered down. Elias jumped, catching the tail with one boot, letting it fling him sideways instead of crushing him. He landed awkwardly, limp pronounced now, and forced himself upright before Krashul could capitalize. In the stands, veterans leaned forward. This wasn't a duel of force. It was erosion. Krashul struck again and again, each blow reshaping the arena. Elias never met power with power. He bled. He yielded ground. He made Krashul work. Between clashes, memories surfaced unbidden. Boarding corridors filled with smoke. Alien warships drifting silent, crews intact but command centers surgically destroyed. Orders given once, obeyed forever. Reaper didn't conquer systems. He ended conflicts by removing the idea that resistance was survivable. Elias ducked a blow and rammed his shoulder into Krashul's knee, the same joint again, the same stress point. The champion staggered half a step. Surprise flickered in Krashul's eyes. You target weaknesses, he said. Elias circled, breathing ragged now. Everyone has them. Krashul roared and charged, abandoning finesse. The crowd screamed encouragement, desperate for finality. Elias waited until the last second, then sidestepped and seized Krashul's harness cable, yanking hard. The champion stumbled forward. Elias climbed him like a wall, drove his forearm under the jaw, twisted, and wrenched back. Something cracked. Not bone, mechanism. Krashul howled as his harness failed, power surging uncontrolled. Elias kicked off, landed poorly, nearly fell. His knee screamed protest. He ignored it. Krashul tore the sparking harness free and hurled it aside. Enough games, he snarled. I will end you. He charged again. This time, Elias didn't evade. He stepped forward. At the moment of impact, Elias pivoted and dropped his weight, letting Krashul's momentum carry him past. Elias drove both hands into the champion's spine, thumbs finding the exact point where armor separated from flesh. He pressed. A precise, brutal motion, one he'd taught to squads who never lived long enough to regret learning it. Krashul froze. Then his legs buckled. The champion collapsed to one knee, breath coming in broken gasps. His strength remained, but his coordination was gone. Neural override. Temporary, but devastating. Silence rippled outward like a shockwave. Elias stood behind him, swaying slightly, blood darkening the sand beneath his boots. You were trained to dominate, he said. We were trained to finish. Krashul tried to rise. Failed. The arena waited. Elias stepped around and met the champion's gaze. There was no triumph in his expression. Only fatigue, and something colder. You built your empire on the idea that humans break first, Elias said. You were wrong. He struck once. Not lethal, incapacitating. Final. Krashul collapsed fully, breath wheezing, alive but beaten beyond recovery. For a long moment, no one spoke. The galaxy watched a truth it had buried claw its way back into daylight. Then alarms wailed across the control tower. Feeds fractured. Archives unlocked. Names resurfaced. Reaper. Elias turned away from the fallen champion and toward the stands. He felt the weight of every eye, every calculation, every sudden fear. He didn't raise his voice. "You remember us now," he said. The gates opened. Not for combat. For consequences. The gates opened inward. Not with ceremony. Not with sound meant for crowds. They slid apart smoothly, controlled, the way doors did when the people behind them were suddenly unsure who held authority. Elias Vaughn didn't move at first. He stood where Krashul had fallen, chest rising unevenly now, the cold finally reaching places adrenaline had sealed off. His vision swam at the edges. The scarred eye throbbed like a buried ember. He kept his balance by habit alone, counting breaths, listening to the rhythm of his own heart like a field report. The pit was silent. 50 billion viewers watched a man refuse to collapse. Med drones hovered closer, tentative, lights flickering between green and amber as their algorithms failed to agree. None crossed the threshold without permission. None wanted to be first. From the mercenary boxes, the vulture captain stumbled forward, palms pressed to the glass. "This bout is concluded," he barked, voice cracking. "Terminate the feed. Now." The feed did not terminate. Instead, the image sharpened. Across the galaxy, locked archives opened like wounds. Old footage bled through, grainy boarding actions, black-armored humans moving with quiet certainty, alien command decks going dark without warning. Casualty numbers appeared without commentary. Entire wars ended between news cycles. A mantid noble in the upper tier hissed and tore his gaze from the screens. "It was classified," he said, voice shaking. "They erased him." "They tried," said an elderly Dravathai beside him. "We all tried." On the sand, Elias finally took a step. Pain surged, sharp and immediate, but his leg held. He walked toward the tunnel, passing Krashul without a glance. The champion lay breathing, eyes unfocused, power stripped not from his body but from the myth around it. Krashul's claw twitched weakly. "Human," he rasped. Elias stopped. Krashul swallowed, pride bleeding out with each breath. "Why spare me?" Elias turned his head just enough. "Because you'll live long enough to remember." He continued on. Halfway to the tunnel, his strength gave out. Elias dropped to one knee, hand braced in the sand. Snow settled on his shoulders, melted, soaked into old fabric. The crowd surged forward instinctively, then froze, afraid to breathe him wrong. A human voice cut through the stillness. "Sir." The handler from earlier, the young one, had slipped past security and stood at the arena's edge, eyes wide, hand shaking. "Sir, we can get you out. Right now." Elias looked up at him. The boy's face held fear, something like hope he didn't yet understand. "No," Elias said gently. "Not yet." The handler swallowed. "They'll come for you. They already have." As if summoned, armored figures poured into the pit, arena enforcers, corporate security, species Elias recognized by gait alone. They fanned out cautiously, weapons raised but uncertain. None wanted to be the one history remembered for pulling the trigger. An officer stepped forward. "Elias Vaughn," he said, reading the name from a wrist display that shook in his grip. "By authority of the coalition." Authority shifted. Elias interrupted. The officer faltered. Elias rose again, slowly, with effort, forcing his leg to obey. He faced them all now, the guards, the crowd, the watching galaxy. "I didn't come to die here," he said. His voice carried without amplification. "I came to remind you why you were afraid." No one spoke. "You called us fragile," Elias continued. "You measured worth in muscle and mass. You never understood what we were built for." A security commander found his courage. "This ends now." Elias nodded once. "It already has." Behind the commander, a Dravathai technician stared at his screen in horror. "Sir," he whispered, "human fleet markers are lighting up. Old ones. Dormant routes." Across star systems, ships long thought scrapped powered up. Crews that had never been conquered answered signals older than treaties. Humans who had learned to survive quietly remembered how to move loudly. The officer lowered his weapon. Elias felt the moment pass through him like a tide. Relief tried to follow. He didn't let it. His knees buckled. This time, he didn't stop the fall. He hit the sand hard, breath leaving him in a sharp exhale. Hands reached for him, human, alien, uncertain. He waved them off weakly, then let one stay. The handler knelt beside him, gripping his arm like an anchor. "Sir," the boy whispered, "what happens now?" Elias stared up at the lights, at the snow drifting through beams meant for bloodshed. "Now," he said, "you make better choices." Med drones finally descended, tools unfolding, scanners humming. They worked carefully, respectfully, like mechanics tending a machine that had rewritten their manuals. As they lifted him, Elias caught one last glimpse of the stands. Faces that had laughed now looked away. Others watched with something close to reverence. The arena would never be the same. Neither would the stories told about it. The handler walked beside the stretcher as it moved toward the tunnel. "Will they call you Reaper again?" Elias closed his eyes. "They always do," he said. "When they forget why wars end." The gates sealed behind him. Outside the pit, across space measured in fear and distance, humanity stirred, not in rage, not in triumph, but in readiness. The galaxy had thrown an old man into the arena. What walked out was a memory it could no longer bury. ChatGPT can make